My daughter-in-law said, "You can't even afford coffee." So I bought the cafe she works at. The cafe smells like warm cinnamon and burnt pride. It's a Tuesday morning in late March, the kind of morning that doesn't know if it wants to be winter or spring. I step inside, mostly because I'm cold. The wind in Pennsylvania this time of year slices through your sleeves no matter how many layers you wear. My fingers are still stiff from gripping the steering wheel of my old Honda. I just want a hot cup of something and maybe a moment to feel like I belong somewhere. I'm 67 years old. My name is Margaret. Most people around here call me Maggie. I was born in Scranton, raised 2 kids, in a 2-bedroom house near the Lackawanna River, and buried my husband Frank 10 years ago, next fall. I live alone now in a house that creaks louder every year, like it's mourning right along with me. The cafe is newer trendy, glass-paneled full of succulents and exposed wood, a neighborhood spot they call it. The kind of place that plays soft indie music and charges $5 for tea. I wouldn't have come in if I knew she'd be working. But there she is, behind the counter, in a pressed green apron, sharp eyeliner, and that practiced, polite smile that never reaches her eyes, my daughter-in-law, Natalie. She doesn't acknowledge me at first. She's talking to a younger man, laughing about something. But when I step closer, her eyes flick over and freeze. She blinks like I've interrupted her dream. "Oh," she says flatly. "Hi." I smile. "Hi, Natalie. Just wanted something warm." She glances at the menu. We're out of the senior discount muffins, but we still have the bran ones. I ignore the jab. "Just coffee's fine." "Black." She taps a few keys on the register. $4.75. I reach into my bag, digging through the coin purse I've carried since the 90s. I have the money, just not the right change. She watches my fingers fumble, and then she says it, so soft I almost don't catch it. "You can't even afford coffee, can you?" My breath catches. My spine goes stiff. I look up, and she's already turned away, smirking toward her coworker, like I'm some punchline she's told 1,000 times. I place the bills on the counter. "No receipt," I say quietly. I take my coffee, but I don't sit. I leave. And I don't cry until I'm in the car. It's not about the coffee. It never is. It's about the look in her eyes, like I'm a burden, like I'm a ghost who lingers too long in a house that no longer wants me. Like all the years I worked, sacrificed, saved, and gave meant nothing, because now, at 67, I'm not earning anything anymore. I wonder what my son would say if he'd heard her. But he wouldn't say anything. He never does. Back at home, the coffee goes cold while I sit at the kitchen table staring at the wall. I think of all the meals I made them, the checks I signed when they bought their first house, the way I helped raise their twins when they couldn't afford daycare. I think about how Natalie was sweet once, before they had money, before they had options, before I became disposable. What do you do with a moment like that? What do you do with a comment that digs into your bones and whispers, "You don't matter anymore"? You breathe. You sip cold coffee. And you decide whether to let it break you or whether to let it wake you up. Sometimes I think about how quiet it gets after a person stops being useful, not just to the world, but to their own family. I wasn't always invisible. I worked in accounting for 32 years. Never a fancy job, but a steady one. I managed payroll budgets, end-of-quarter reconciliations, even taught a few interns how to make sense of Excel when they thought formulas were magic. Frank and I never lived big, but we lived right. We didn't take vacations, but we paid off the house. We didn't drive new cars, but we paid for both our sons to attend college without loans. And now I clip coupons and wonder how a woman who once handled a $2.5 million annual budget gets pitied for miscounting change at a coffee shop counter. They don't see me, not really. They see the old hands, the gray hair, the bent back. They don't know that when I sit too long, my hip screams and my left ankle freezes in place for 20 minutes. But I don't say anything. I don't complain. That's not how I was raised. I go for walks when I can. I bake when I can afford butter. I have one friend left in town, Carla, who I met in line at the post office 6 years ago. We laugh about the aches in our bones and trade recipes we no longer have the ingredients for. Mostly, I listen, because talking about myself makes people uncomfortable. And because what would I even say? My daughter-in-law humiliated me in public today. She thinks I'm nothing. And worse, I think she might be right. No, some truths stay unspoken. That's the real difference between my generation and theirs. We bleed in silence. My house is quiet now, too. Frank's chair still sits in the living room, facing the window. I can't bring myself to move it. On cold nights, I wrap myself in the quilt we bought the year we lost our second child, a little girl I never got to raise. We named her Rose. Some heartbreaks don't shout. They sit inside you, folded like love letters that were never mailed. It's strange how pain can live alongside peace, how you can wake up with gratitude and still feel abandoned by the people you gave everything to. I think of my son Matthew. He used to run to me when he scraped his knee. He used to cry if I wasn't there to kiss his forehead at night. He used to whisper, "Don't tell Dad, but I like your cooking better." Now he barely calls. And when he does, it's always in the car on the way to something more important. I listen to the sound of the turn signal more than I listen to him. And Natalie, she was never cruel in the beginning. When they were just dating, she brought me homemade candles and told me I reminded her of her grandmother. I remember hugging her on their wedding day, telling her she looked radiant. I meant it. Maybe something shifted when she realized I had no more money left to give. That morning at the cafe, the words keep replaying. You can't even afford coffee, can you? It's not what she said, it's what it revealed. That somewhere along the way, she stopped seeing me as someone who mattered. That my time had expired, and now I was simply clutter in the background of her life. But I still matter, even if no one claps when I enter a room, even if no one asks how my day was, even if the world thinks I'm done contributing. I still have breath. I still have stories. I still have something in me that isn't dead yet. And here's the funny thing about being underestimated. It makes people stop watching you. And when no one's watching, that's when you can really move. If you were in my shoes, how would you handle it? Would you let it go? Would you let that one comment stay buried in your bones? Or would you find a way to answer it without saying a single word? It started slowly, like most things do. The kind of shift you don't notice until the damage is done. A cold shoulder here, a missed invitation there. The first time I sensed something had changed between Natalie and me was 2 Christmases ago. I had baked my famous cranberry orange bread, the one Matthew used to beg for every year when he was a boy. I wrapped it in parchment and tied it with twine. When I handed it to her at the door, she took it like it was a block of obligation, smiled tight and brief. "Oh, thanks, Margaret," she said, already turning away. Not Maggie, not Mom, just Margaret. Like I was the landlord stopping by with a receipt. I told myself not to take it personally. But that's the thing about growing older. You have too much time to sit and remember the tone in someone's voice, the half-second delay before a hug, the way your name suddenly feels like a stranger's. At family dinners, the space between us grew wider. Natalie would pass me dishes without looking, interrupt me mid-sentence, laugh a little louder when I was quiet, as if the air was better without my voice in it. She'd lean into Matthew's shoulder and whisper things behind her wine glass. He'd chuckle oblivious or pretending to be. I stopped offering to host. I stopped asking if I could help clean up. Every time I did, she'd say something like, "No, don't worry, you've done enough," with a tone that made it sound like I'd overstayed a welcome no one gave me. It hurt more than I ever admitted, because I knew what she thought of me. I saw it in the way she handled her own mother, brunch dates, spa vouchers, birthday surprises. And then there was me, the one who sat in the back row at the twins' piano recital, the one who was told the party was just for friends this year. Frank used to tell me, "Some people only love you when you're useful, and the moment you're not, they forget how much you gave." I didn't believe him at the time. I do now. But the worst part wasn't Natalie's coldness. It was Matthew's silence. My son, who once clung to my leg when he was scared of thunder, who built me paper roses for Mother's Day, who after Frank passed called me every day for 2 weeks just to hear my voice. Now he just watches the tension in the room and says nothing. He lets her get away with those remarks, the ones dipped in honey and poison. He acts like I can't possibly be hurt if I pretend not to be. But I am hurt. I've been hurt for a long time. I just don't show it, at least not to them. So I keep visiting, keep bringing polite smiles and store-bought desserts when I can't afford to bake. I sit through meals where no one asks me about my life. I hand over birthday checks that are barely acknowledged, and I keep telling myself it's better than being completely shut out. But is it? Is it really? The morning after the coffee shop incident, I get a call. It's from Natalie. "Hey," she says, voice too casual. "Can you watch the twins after school Friday?" Their babysitter flaked again. I pause. It's not really a request. It's an assumption. Because in her mind, that's all I'm good for now. Filling in the blanks, picking up the slack, being useful, only when she needs me. I almost say yes. Almost. But something in me shifts. I can't, I say. I have plans. A silence stretches. Not angry, just confused. Because in Natalie's world, I don't have plans. I don't have a life outside of being her fallback. "Oh," she says. "Okay, I'll figure something out." She hangs up, and for the first time in a long time, I feel something like power. Not spite, not vengeance. Just the quiet reclaiming of a space I didn't realize I'd let her take. Later that night, I sit by Frank's old chair, sipping tea that's gone lukewarm. I watch the streetlights flicker through the blinds. I think about the way Natalie looked at me, like I was a smudge on glass. And I remember that smile of hers, the one that never reaches her eyes. And I wonder if she knew what I was capable of, what I still had in me. Would she still smirk? Would she still treat me like I was fading? Or would she finally look at me and realize I was never weak? I was just waiting. It wasn't always like this. Not even close. When Matthew and Natalie first got married, they lived in a cramped 1-bedroom near the interstate. The kitchen was so small, you had to turn sideways just to open the fridge. But they were in love, or at least it looked that way, back then. And they were trying, really trying to build a future. I remember thinking Natalie was determined, maybe too much so. But she worked hard. I respected that. Then came the day they asked me for help. It was during one of those family dinners where the meat gets cold because everyone talks too long. Natalie pushed her plate away and said, "We've been pre-approved for a mortgage. It's a little more than we planned, but it's our dream house." She looked over at Matthew, who nodded like a soldier taking orders. I smiled. "That's wonderful." And then came the pause. Matthew shifted in his seat. "We're short on the down payment, though. Just a little." Natalie cut in smooth as silk. "Just 10,000. But we'd pay you back, of course, as soon as we're settled." My heart stopped for a second. 10,000 wasn't pocket change for me. It was most of what I had. I had some tucked away for emergencies, some set aside in a CD account Frank and I opened before he passed. I wasn't living in poverty, but I wasn't swimming either. Still, I looked at my son, and all I saw was that little boy who once brought me dandelions as if they were roses. That same boy who whispered, "I love you," through missing teeth. So I said yes. I cashed in the CD. I signed the check and slid it across the table. Matthew hugged me. Natalie smiled. And no one ever brought it up again. No payment plans, no monthly envelopes, no interest, not even a thank you card. At first I told myself it didn't matter. I had done what a mother should do. But the silence became louder with time. When they moved into the new house, 4 bedrooms, granite counters, a backyard big enough for barbecues, I watched them host parties for friends I'd never met. I watched Natalie post pictures of their renovations online, her captions dripping with pride. I was proud too, quietly, privately, until the first Christmas in the new house. That was when I realized something had shifted. I brought gifts for the twins, homemade jam, for Natalie, a sweater, for Matthew, and I received a scented candle, half used. The wick was blackened. I said nothing. It wasn't about the gift. It was about what it meant, that I had become a background character in a life I helped finance, that $10,000 was never repaid, not in dollars, not in gratitude, not even in decency. And I suppose that's when the resentment began, not just in me, but in her. Maybe Natalie hated that she had to ask me. Maybe she hated that she owed me. Or maybe she just saw me as easy, someone to squeeze help from then set aside. Either way, the warmth began to fade. Little by little, she turned colder. The way she smiled when others were around, then snapped when we were alone. The way she would forget to invite me to school, plays but remember to ask for babysitting help. The way she made me feel like a coat left on the back of a chair, once useful, now just taking up space. I kept quiet, because that's what mothers do. But that morning in the cafe, her words cracked something open. You can't even afford coffee, can you? No apology, no memory of what I gave up, so she could have that job, that house, that life. I think now about that check I wrote, how I signed it with love, how I handed it over without a second thought, and how maybe I should have thought twice. But what do you do when the people you love forget how to love you back? What do you do when your kindness becomes your curse? If you were me, would you regret it? Would you ask for it back? Or would you find another way to make peace with yourself, if not with them? There's a particular ache that comes when you realize you're no longer welcome in places you helped build. The cafe sits on the corner of Main, and Willow all reclaimed wood, and artisan lighting, the kind of place that makes you feel old just for walking in. I only stopped by because the thrift store 2 doors down was closed for inventory, and my legs were tired. I just needed somewhere warm to rest, somewhere that didn't remind me of the empty living room waiting for me at home. I didn't even realize Natalie worked there until I stepped inside. At first, she didn't see me. She was leaning over the counter, whispering something to a customer, her lips turned up in that small smirk she saves for people who can offer her something. I stood there awkwardly holding my coat closed, with both hands, unsure if I should stay. Then she turned and spotted me. For a second, her smile slipped. "Oh," she said. No warmth, no welcome. Just the heavy thud of disappointment in a single syllable. I nodded politely. "Hello, Natalie. I didn't know you worked here." "Manager," she corrected, straightening her name tag. "Can I help you with something?" I looked at the chalkboard menu. I didn't even know what half of those drinks were. Lavender oat cortado, turmeric latte with honey foam. "I'll just have a regular coffee. Black, please." She sighed, like I was asking her to grind the beans with her teeth. I stepped aside and waited while she filled the cup. The other girl behind the counter, maybe early 20s, bright-eyed, said nothing but watched us closely. Natalie handed me the cup with 2 fingers, like she didn't want to touch my hand. "That'll be $4.75, she said, already turning to the next customer. I fumbled through my bag. My fingers weren't cooperating. Coins fell to the floor with a clink. You can't even afford coffee, can you? I froze. Didn't even look up. Just picked up the coins and placed a crumpled 5 on the counter. "No receipt," I said. Her smirk was still there as I walked out, but it wasn't the smirk that hurt. It was the laughter behind me. Laughter I wasn't sure was directed at me, but it felt like it was. The barista trying not to smile. The man in line chuckling into his phone. I sat in my car for a long time, hands wrapped around that hot cup. But the coffee was bitter, and it did nothing to thaw the cold that had settled in my chest. Back home, I replayed it again and again, the way she looked at me, like I was a stain on her polished world, like I should be ashamed of myself, for aging, for not having enough, for daring to walk into her place. And maybe I should have been, but I wasn't. I was angry, not loud, messy anger, but the quiet kind. The kind that brews beneath the surface and settles in your bones. The kind that doesn't yell at plans. That night, I pulled out my old ledger book, the one Frank and I used to budget the house. I hadn't opened it in years. I turned page after page of chicken scratch math notes in the margins grocery lists. And then I turned to a blank page. I wrote 3 words, "By the Café." I laughed when I saw it. Me by the Café. But the idea stayed. It pulsed in my brain like a heartbeat. Because here's the thing. When you've been made to feel small enough times, there comes a day when you stop asking for space. You take it. I didn't know how yet, didn't know when, but I knew this. If Natalie didn't think I could afford coffee, she was going to be real surprised when I started signing her paychecks. If you were me, would you let it go? Or would you walk back in, not for the coffee, but for your place at the table? The next time I stepped into that cafe, it wasn't for the coffee. It was 2 weeks later on a Tuesday. Again, I told myself I was just passing through, that I needed to check the hours on the pharmacy across the street. But something tugged at me, and before I knew it, my hand was on the door again. I wasn't sure what I expected. A glare from Natalie, maybe. Another backhanded comment. But this time, she wasn't there. Instead, a young woman stood behind the counter, mid-20s maybe. Auburn curls pulled into a messy bun. She wore a faded sweatshirt under her apron, and her eyes lit up when she saw me. "Hi there," she said. "Can I get you something?" I hesitated. "Just a coffee. Black." "Coming right up." She moved with practiced ease, pouring the brew into a ceramic cup instead of a to-go paper one. "It's on the house today," she added with a wink. I blinked. "Why?" She smiled. "You don't remember me, do you?" I tilted my head, studying her face. There was something vaguely familiar in the slope of her cheekbones, the way her eyes crinkled when she grinned. "You helped my mom," she said. "Back when I was in high school. She worked in accounts at Barton & Taylor. You stayed late to help her prep for her interview at corporate. I was 15 then, always waiting in the lobby after school." I gasped. "Samantha." She beamed. "Sam, now. And yeah, you were the only adult who ever talked to me like I was worth listening to." I felt my breath catch in my throat. Sam handed me the coffee and leaned on the counter. "You always seemed like the kind of person who belonged in charge of something, not pushed around by people who think they invented the world." I laughed quietly. "That's generous." She shrugged. "Well, this place is for sale. Owner's moving to Colorado. They're trying to sell fast before the summer crowd dies off. If I had the money, I'd buy it." My heart stilled. "For sale?" I asked, feigning casual interest. Sam nodded. "Yep. Price isn't bad, honestly. It's a shame. It's got good bones, just bad management. I didn't ask if Natalie knew. I didn't have to. My hand gripped the warm ceramic cup, but it wasn't the coffee that warmed me. It was something else, something older, a pulse, a flicker, the sensation of purpose. Later that afternoon, I found myself parked outside the office of a realtor I hadn't spoken to since Frank passed. I told myself I'd just inquire, just get a number. But when the agent walked in, mid-40s, polite, wearing too much cologne, I realized how much I wanted to do this. "How can I help you, Mrs. Green?" he asked. Pen ready. "I'd like to discuss the purchase of the Cornerstone Café on Main and Willow," I said, folding my hands over my purse. "But I'd like to remain anonymous. For now." He raised an eyebrow but said nothing. I left the office with a file folder, a nervous flutter in my chest, and the kind of grin that only shows up when you realize something inside you is still alive. That night, I sat at my kitchen table, running numbers, like I hadn't done in years. My savings weren't vast, but they were stable. Frank had left me just enough. I still had the house, no mortgage. I'd never been one for indulgence. My car was old, my clothes older. But this wasn't an indulgence. It was an investment, not just in real estate. In me. Frank's voice echoed in my memory. "Don't let the world tell you when you're done, Maggie. You tell it." That night, I wrote a list. Contact Sam privately. Hire an accountant to review the books. Consult a lawyer about staff contracts. Prepare a letter of intent. And at the bottom, I added one more item in shaky cursive. Walk in with my head held high. If you were me, would you do it? Would you risk your nest egg, your peace, your quiet, just to prove a point? Or would you remind the world and your daughter-in-law that you never stopped being someone worth watching? The thing about being underestimated for so long is that people stop paying attention. They assume you're predictable, harmless, tired. But I was none of those things. Not anymore. I spent the next week moving in silence, like a chess player who'd been watching the board long enough to see 3 moves ahead. Every decision I made was careful, deliberate. I didn't tell Matthew. I didn't tell Carla. I didn't even tell the woman at the pharmacy who always tried to chat when I refilled my prescriptions. I kept everything tucked tight against my chest, where the tremble of nerves couldn't be seen. It started with the numbers. The cafe's asking price wasn't outrageous. It was reachable, manageable. I had savings from the years Frank and I had lived modestly. We had lived below our means for decades, never traveled, never bought brand new. My pension wasn't much, but the combination of savings, a small inheritance from my Aunt Esther, and the emergency fund Frank insisted we keep untouched, meant I had enough. Not to live lavishly, but to take a risk. This wasn't about revenge. It was about reclamation. I contacted a small business lawyer in town, Mr. Lyons. He was maybe 10 years younger than me, with kind eyes and a voice like warm bread. When I explained my intentions, he smiled and said, "About time someone like you owned something with their name on it." I told him I wanted everything quiet. Natalie couldn't know. Not yet. He agreed. Next was Sam. I invited her over under the guise of having tea. She brought fresh scones, and when I told her about my plan, her eyes welled up. "I'll help you run it," she said instantly. "You don't have to do this alone." "I know," I said. "But you'll need to keep this to yourself for now." She nodded. "She won't hear it from me." There was a comfort in that, being seen, trusted. Sam had grown into the kind of young woman I wished Natalie had turned out to be. Earnest, grateful, unafraid of hard work. There was something poetic about building this next chapter with her. By Friday, I had submitted a letter of intent. By Tuesday, my offer was accepted. By the following week, the cafe on paper was mine, and not a single soul in my family knew. It felt delicious in a strange way. Walking past the shop and seeing Natalie inside, pacing behind the counter, barking at a barista, completely unaware that she was standing on my floors, under my roof. There were moments I almost told Matthew. Moments when I sat with my phone in hand, wondering if he deserved to know. But then, I'd remember the silence, the years of letting her speak over me, the missed calls, the ignored holidays, the way he always let her get away with it, even when I was clearly hurting. This was mine, and for once, I wasn't going to explain myself to anyone. I met with Sam again this time, inside the cafe after hours. We stood under the warm glow of hanging bulbs while the espresso machine hissed in the background. "Are you nervous?" she asked. I shook my head. "I'm ready." She smiled. "You're gonna be great, you know." I smiled back. The walls still smelled faintly of espresso and ambition. The countertop was scuffed from years of careless elbows. The menu was outdated. The staff morale was low. The bookkeeping was a mess. But I saw it for what it was: potential. It was the same thing I'd seen in myself when I was younger. The same thing Frank had seen in me when I was 21, standing barefoot on our first apartment's porch, vowing to make something out of nothing. This cafe wasn't perfect, neither was I. But we were both unfinished stories, and I intended to write the next chapter myself. If you were me, would you keep it secret? Would you wait for the right moment? Or would you burst through the door and announce it with pride? Because me, I had one more move left, and Natalie wasn't going to see it coming. The lockbox was tucked behind a row of linens in the closet. I hadn't opened it in years. It was one of those fireproof ones Frank insisted we buy after watching a special on house fires back in '94. It used to hold birth certificates, tax documents, and photos we never hung on the wall. But after he died, I tucked it away. Too many memories, sealed in cold metal. That night, after signing the final transfer of ownership for the cafe, I found myself drawn to it. I don't know why. Maybe because the house felt too quiet. Maybe because I needed to feel him near me. Or maybe because somewhere deep down, I wanted a sign. The key was still on the nail behind the pantry door. I pulled it open and felt a rush of old paper and lavender sachets. Faded receipts, our marriage license, a letter addressed to me in his handwriting, yellowed with time. To Maggie, if you're opening this, then I'm gone. And if you're anything like I remember, you're probably sitting on the floor in your bathrobe, with a cup of tea, pretending you're not crying. My hand trembled. I read each word like it was stitched into my skin. I know life gets heavy, sometimes. I know you'll carry more than you should, and you'll never complain. That's who you are. But promise me something. When you're finally free of everything that tied you down, don't disappear. Don't let them erase you. You were never meant to fade, Maggie. You were meant to take up space. I sobbed then, not because of the letter, but because I had forgotten that once upon a time, someone believed in me so completely, it never occurred to him I'd do anything but rise again. Frank always knew my heart better than I did. He used to say I had fire under my ribs, that I'd never burn a house down, but I'd warm it for everyone who walked in. That was the kind of power he saw in me. Not loud, not showy, but steady, enduring. The kind you don't notice until the cold sets in, and then suddenly you remember where the heat came from. I folded the letter gently and slipped it into my pocket. The next day, I brought Sam the keys. We stood in the cafe again, but this time it felt different, like it had been stripped of Natalie's sharp edges and filled instead with possibility. I want this place to breathe again, I told her. No more hierarchy, no more fear. I want kindness to be the rule, not the exception. Sam nodded. We can do that. And one more thing I added. We're taking the manager title off the name tags. No one needs to feel smaller than the person beside them. We laughed. We dreamed. We imagined book clubs, poetry nights, a community fridge, by the back door for anyone who needed a meal without shame. It wasn't about Natalie anymore. It was about me, and about building something that could outlast bitterness. But part of me still wondered, when she finds out, how will she react? And more than that, how will Matthew react? Would he defend her again? Would he flinch in embarrassment? Or would he, for the first time in a long while, see his mother clearly? I didn't know, but I was done waiting for their permission to exist. I'd spent too many years living like I was always apologizing for taking up space. Not anymore. Frank's voice lingered in my mind like the scent of pipe tobacco in his old coat. Don't disappear, Maggie. Take up space. So I did. If you were me, would you tell your son? Would you let your silence be the final statement? Or would you invite them in and let them see the woman they thought was gone, standing tall in a place she built with her own 2 hands? By the time the final escrow papers were signed, I knew every inch of that cafe's finances, every overdrawn line item, every overpriced supplier Natalie had blindly trusted. The books were a mess glossed over, with quick fixes and assumptions that customers would keep walking through the door no matter how poorly they were treated. But they hadn't. The numbers didn't lie. Revenue was down. Reviews were souring. Staff turnover was rising. All under her watch. The final ownership transfer came through on a Thursday. I celebrated by doing something completely ordinary, walking down to the post office to drop off a bill. It was raining. My knees ached, but my heart felt like it had found a beat it hadn't danced to in years. I didn't need anyone to clap. I didn't need applause or validation, just that silent knowledge. I had done something brave. I didn't sleep that night, not because I was anxious, but because I couldn't stop smiling. I watched the ceiling fan spin above me in the dark, remembering the way Frank used to hum in his sleep when he was proud of something. I wondered if he'd be humming now. When the sun rose, it was pale and cold, but it carried the kind of light that made me believe things were changing. I dressed with care, pressed my blouse, slid my wedding band back onto my finger. Not because I needed to, but because I wanted Frank to come with me. At precisely 6:59 a.m., I arrived at the cafe. It opened at 7. Sam met me at the door with 2 coffees, one for her, one for me. "You sure you're ready?" she asked. I nodded. I was born ready. I just forgot for a while. We walked in together. The cafe was still quiet, warm from the morning ovens. The smell of fresh cinnamon rolls filled the air. I stood behind the counter for the first time and looked out at the space. Mine. Natalie arrived late. Of course she did. Her heels clicked sharply on the tile, her purse slung over one shoulder. She didn't see me at first. She breezed in, talking on the phone. Then she stopped, froze. I was wiping down the espresso machine, back turned slightly. She blinked, confused. "Maggie," she said slowly. I turned, smile, calm voice, steady. "Good morning, Natalie." She looked around. "What are you doing?" Sam stepped forward. "She owns the cafe now. You could have heard a pin drop." Natalie's mouth opened, then shut. Her eyes narrowed. "No, that's not funny." I walked around the counter, folded the ownership papers on the table, and tapped them gently. "It's not a joke. As of yesterday, this is my shop. You work for me." She blinked. For once, she had no clever retort. But how she stammered. I looked at her evenly. "You assumed I couldn't afford coffee. Turns out, I could afford a lot more than that." The silence that followed was the sweetest sound I'd heard in years. It wasn't about humiliating her. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't gloat. I didn't throw her words back at her. I didn't need to. She had to sit in her own discomfort. And I stayed still, solid, unbothered, and absolutely unmovable. After a long pause, she scoffed. This is ridiculous. You don't know how to run a business. I smiled. I ran one for 32 years. It just didn't serve lattes. She turned and left. Not stormed, not cried, just left. And I let her, because I had nothing left to prove, and everything to begin. That afternoon, I brewed myself a fresh cup of black coffee. I sat by the window and watched customers come in, one by one, faces familiar and new. Some remembered me from church. Some didn't know me at all. But they all smiled. They all stayed. Sam took orders. The baristas laughed again. The tension that had choked the place for years had lifted. It felt like breathing for the first time in a long while. If you were me, would you have done it? Would you have bought the place where you were once humiliated? Or would you have stayed quiet, letting the world decide when you were finished? Because sometimes silence isn't weakness. It's strategy. Monday came with a kind of energy I hadn't felt since before my hair turned silver. I was up before the sun, standing in my kitchen, sipping coffee from a chipped blue mug Frank bought me during our honeymoon in the Poconos. The same mug Natalie once called embarrassing, but it still held warmth, just like me. I took my time getting ready that morning. Pressed slacks, clean blouse, apron folded neatly in my bag, not to prove anything, but because I intended to work. This wasn't just about owning the place. It was about building something again from the ground up, something better. At 6:45, I unlocked the cafe and stepped inside. The lights buzzed to life. The floor creaked under my feet in that familiar way. The silence of the morning was holy, sacred, almost a beginning. Sam showed up 15 minutes later, humming some tune I didn't recognize. Her curls pulled into a ponytail. You ready for your first shift as boss? I grinned. Let's make today gentle. We started slow. No fancy changes, yet just little things. Cleaned the menus, set fresh flowers at each table, turned the music down so people could talk to each other, lit a candle in the corner where the window let in a strip of gold light. By 7:30, the first customers arrived. Some looked confused to see me behind the counter. Didn't you used to just come in? One older gentleman asked, blinking at me. I've been promoted, I replied with a wink. He laughed and tipped his coffee. At 8:15, the door swung open. Natalie walked in, sunglasses perched on her headphone in hand. She stopped dead when she saw me behind the counter, apron on towel, tucked into my waistband, wiping down the espresso machine, like I'd been doing it for years. What is this? She said, eyes darting. Sam stepped forward. It's called morning prep. Natalie's voice lowered. You don't belong here, Maggie. I didn't flinch. Funny, I said. Because I own here. Her jaw clenched. You can't just... I can, I said gently. And I did. I'm not here to argue with you, Natalie. You're free to stay. Or not. Her face turned red. You can't run this place. You're not qualified. I tilted my head. 32 years in payroll. HR and management say otherwise. I helped build companies bigger than this before you were out of high school. She glanced around. Customers were watching now. No one said anything, but the air had shifted. Natalie blinked lips, pressed into a line, and then, without another word, turned and walked out. I exhaled, not in relief, in peace. She might return, she might not, but that didn't matter, because for the first time, I had the choice. I wasn't just filling in gaps left by other people's convenience. I wasn't living in the shadow of someone else's approval. I was at the helm. The rest of the day unfolded like a quiet symphony. Familiar faces trickled in. Someone played a few notes on the old piano in the back. A little girl drew hearts on a napkin and gave it to me with shy eyes. You look like my grandma, she said. I hope that's a good thing, I told her, and she nodded fiercely. After closing, Sam and I sat by the window with 2 slices of banana bread and a shared silence that didn't need to be filled. You feel it, she asked. I nodded. Yeah, it's mine now. The moon rose over Main Street, soft and silver. And I thought to myself, not about Natalie, not even about Matthew. I thought about Maggie Green, a woman they tried to shelf, and a woman who in the quietest, most graceful way put her apron on and took back her life. If you were me, would you have stayed behind that counter? Would you have stood silent and firm while the storm flared up in front of you? Or would you have done what I did, kept serving coffee, one cup at a time, and let the truth steep quietly until it was ready? The very next morning, Natalie was back, and this time, she didn't come alone. Matthew was with her. They walked in like they were still in control of the story, like I was a minor inconvenience to be dealt with. She had her arms crossed tight across her chest, and he had that distracted, tired look on his face, the same one he always wore when she dragged him into something. I was wiping down the tables, humming a tune I couldn't quite remember the lyrics to. Sam was at the register. A few regulars were sipping coffee and reading newspapers, the smell of cinnamon rolls lingering in the air. I turned slowly. Good morning, Natalie. Hello, Matthew. My son's face flickered with discomfort. Mom, is this true? I straightened, napkin still in hand. That I own the cafe, yes. I signed the final paperwork last Thursday. Natalie laughed, but it wasn't real laughter. It was short and sharp, like a bark. This has to be a joke. It's not, I said, calm as still water. She turned to Matthew. Tell her she can't just buy the place I work at. It's petty. It's invasive. I stepped forward, voice steady. Petty is belittling someone in public. Invasive is telling an elder she doesn't belong in a cafe because she doesn't fit your aesthetic. Owning a business, that's just business. Natalie's eyes narrowed. You did this to humiliate me. No, I replied. I did this because I was tired of being humiliated. She blinked, thrown off by the softness in my tone. She expected fire. But fire doesn't always rage. It warms. It endures. Matthew cleared his throat. Why didn't you tell me? I looked at him long and hard. Why didn't you ever ask how I was doing? The words landed like a stone in a still pond. His lips parted, then closed again. No answer. The room was quiet. No one moved. I didn't need your permission, I added, gently. And you didn't ask for mine when you borrowed $10,000 and never paid me back. Natalie flushed. We were young. We had kids. I know, I said. And I gave willingly. But you don't get to pretend I've been nothing but a burden since. Matthew looked down at the floor. Mom, I'm sorry. It came out so quiet. I almost didn't hear it. But I did. And it broke something open in me. Not bitterness. Not anger. Something softer. Something sad. Because all I had ever wanted was to be seen. Not praised. Not even thanked. Just seen. I'm not trying to ruin anything, I said, turning to Natalie. But I won't stay invisible anymore. You don't have to like me, but you will respect me. She crossed her arms tighter. I can't work here under you. I nodded. That's your choice. And with that, she turned and walked out. Matthew lingered, his mouth drawn tight. She'll come around, he said, but he didn't sound sure. This really upset her. I met his eyes. Then maybe she should ask herself why. He gave a half nod, then followed her out. The bell above the door jingled softly, and the air slowly settled again. Sam came out from the back holding a fresh tray of lemon bars. That was intense. I chuckled. That was overdue. She placed a plate in front of me. Want the first bite? I took it, chewing slowly, as the tension melted into the floorboards. Across the cafe, an older couple clinked their mugs and smiled at me. I smiled back. It wasn't triumph I felt. It was something better. Clarity. No more walking on eggshells. No more shrinking to fit into spaces I helped build. No more waiting for someone else to give me worth. If you were me, would you have stood your ground? Would you have stayed calm when everything in you wanted to shout? The menu, the old one, was cluttered with fancy names and overpriced items that no one really understood. I wanted to bring it back to basics, but better, healthier, more inclusive, affordable. I sat down with Sam and a stack of notebooks I hadn't touched in years, remnants of old work projects, ideas scrawled in margins, budgets Frank and I had planned together. We could add gluten-free options, Sam suggested, tapping her pen against a cup. Vegan milk alternatives, locally sourced pastries. I nodded. And discounts for seniors, veterans, and teachers. People who give and don't always get. We worked late into the evening, sketching menus, planning events, and brainstorming ways to make the cafe a community hub instead of just another stop on the way to work. One afternoon, I found an old framed photo of Frank and me on our wedding day in the attic. I brought it down and placed it in the cafe's back room, a quiet reminder of where I came from and who I was. Legacy, I told Sam. That's what this is. She smiled. Your legacy. But the changes weren't just on paper. I instituted new rules. Kindness as the core policy, respect as non-negotiable. No more snapping at staff. No more belittling customers. No gossip. No judgment. The staff were skeptical at first, but the atmosphere shifted quickly. Smiles grew more genuine. Customers lingered longer. The community noticed. I even started a memory wall near the register, photos, letter stories from local seniors who wanted to share their lives and wisdom. It became a quiet celebration of the invisible people in our town. My son came by one afternoon. He sat quietly, sipping his coffee, watching the cafe hum with life. I'm proud of you, he said softly. I smiled, feeling a warmth that wasn't just from the cup in my hand. It's not just my cafe anymore, I said. It belongs to everyone who walks through that door. Natalie never came back, and part of me was grateful, because this was no longer a place for bitterness. It was a place for healing, for growth, for grace. If you were me, would you have rewritten the rules? Would you have softened where you needed to? Or would you have held fast, unyielding, until the world bent to your will? Because sometimes reclaiming yourself means learning when to be strong and when to be gentle. It was a chilly Thursday afternoon when Matthew finally walked into the cafe. He looked older than I remembered, worn around the edges, like life had taken more bites out of him than he was ready to chew. He lingered near the doorway, eyes scanning the bustling room, the customers chatting softly, the baristas moving with newfound ease. I spotted him and offered a small smile. He approached slowly, clearing his throat. Mom, he said, voice low, I heard. I nodded. I figured you would. He ran a hand through his hair, looking every bit the conflicted man I knew he was. Natalie told me you bought the cafe. And, he sighed, she's furious, says you humiliated her, that you went behind our backs. I looked him in the eye. I didn't go behind anyone's back, Matthew. I took care of my business. I didn't expect your support, but I hoped for at least a conversation. He looked down, ashamed. I'm sorry. I should have seen how she was treating you. I should have stood up for you. I studied his face lines I hadn't noticed before the weight of responsibility he carried. I'm not here for apologies, I said softly. I'm here to tell you, this isn't about punishment. It's about respect. He nodded, swallowing hard. I want to help. I want to make things right. Good, I said, because this cafe isn't just a business. It's my life. It's a place where I'm finally seen. He smiled a little hesitantly. I want to be a part of that. For the first time in years, I felt hope flicker between us, not just as mother and son, but as partners. But part of me knew that some bridges take time to rebuild. that some wounds are deeper than words can heal, and that sometimes the strongest love is the love that waits patiently, silently, for a chance to grow again. If you were me, would you forgive quickly? Would you hold your heart open? Or would you guard it fiercely until trust was earned anew? Because family isn't just blood. It's the choices we make every day to see each other. The day Natalie quit wasn't dramatic. No shouting matches, no slammed doors, just a quiet resolve wrapped in stiff shoulders and pursed lips. She came in on a Tuesday morning, said she was reconsidering her options, and handed in her resignation letter without looking me in the eye. I nodded. No hard feelings, I said, voice even. She shrugged. Goodbye, Maggie. And just like that, she was gone. The staff waited to see what would happen next. Would I hire someone better? Someone younger, sharper, someone who fit the image. Natalie left behind. I didn't have to look far. Sam was ready, eager, even. Her energy was infectious, her kindness palpable. She knew the business, the community, the heart of the cafe. She wasn't just a barista anymore. She was a leader. I offered her the manager position that same day. She accepted with a bright smile and a shake of her curls. The cafe blossomed under new stewardship. The air was lighter, the laughter louder. Customers returned, bringing friends and neighbors. The memory wall grew thicker with stories and pictures, a living tapestry of connection. I watched it all heartful. I thought about the woman Natalie used to be, the warmth that had dimmed under years of entitlement and disregard. I wished her well truly, but I also knew that sometimes letting go is the kindest act of all, because growth often comes from loss, from the courage to say, this is not my story anymore, and to welcome in the chapters still waiting to be written. If you were me, would you have held on? Would you have begged for a second chance? Or would you have embraced the freedom that comes with new beginnings? Because sometimes the greatest strength is in knowing when to close the door and when to open a better one. Standing behind the counter, I watched the morning sun spill across the cafe floor, lighting up the corners that used to be shadowed by doubt. The scent of freshly ground coffee beans mingles with the laughter of customers who know this place as more than just a shop, it's a home. I am Maggie Green, a woman who was once dismissed, overlooked, and told she didn't belong. But today, I am a business owner, a leader, and most importantly, a woman who took back her story. The cafe hums, with life, a community reborn, through kindness, respect, and shared memories. The memory wall stands proudly near the register, a testament to the lives that intertwine here, including mine and Frank's, whose photograph smiles softly from its place on the wall. Matthew stops by, his eyes full of something I hadn't seen in years' pride. We exchange a quiet nod, the silence between us speaking volumes. The journey hasn't been easy. There were days I doubted myself, nights when loneliness crept in, and moments when giving up seemed simpler. But through it all, I held on to a quiet truth that I was never meant to fade. I am more than a mother. I am a legacy, and this cafe is proof, not of revenge or bitterness, but of resilience and grace. If you were me, would you let your story be defined by the hurt others caused? Or would you choose to write a new chapter, filled with hope, dignity, and love? Because in the end, we all deserve to be seen, not just as we are, but as we can be. Slowly, the evening light softens the edges of the cafe. The chatter quiets to a gentle murmur. I lean back in my chair, hands folded in my lap, and breathe. This place, these people, they are my second chance. And as I close my eyes, the future feels bright, full of possibility, and wrapped in the kind of peace only hard-won grace can bring. If you were me, what would you do in this situation? Would you hold on to hope? Would you keep moving forward? Would you forgive yourself and others, even when it's hardest? Because sometimes the most courageous thing is simply to keep believing in the good yet to come.